Nosotros ahora conoceremos más de un proyecto impulsado por el periódico The Guardian, que enfoca la información sobre aspectos y lugares de nuestro mundo que no suelen tener un gran apoyo mediático. Se llama The Guardian Global Development, y si le echáis un vistazo rápido, veréis que en portada ahora mismo llevan temas como el papel de las mujeres en la política de Liberia, el mal momento que atraviesa Haití tras el paso del huracán Sandy, o las dificultades económicas que atraviesa Zimbabue para organizar sus próximas elecciones. Esta charla podréis comentarla con el hashtag GuardianEBE, GuardianEBE, y además podréis agregar ahí la P al final para hacer las preguntas. A nuestro siguiente invitado le entrevistará Juan Luis Sánchez, Juanlu para los amigos, periodista, especialista en contenidos digitales y nuevos medios y además subdirector de diario.es. Él va a ser el responsable de charlar con un hombre que ha hecho periodismo en Kenia, Sudán, Etiopía, Níger, Zambia, Somalia o Corea del Sur. Con un fuerte aplauso recibimos a Juan Luis Sánchez y a Mark Tran.
Bueno, hola a todos. Es muy complicado competir con una mesa de propiedad intelectual en el EBE, es muy complicado competir con Angry Birds en el EBE, pero gracias por quedaros a hablar de derechos humanos, de información social, de periodismo con enfoque de derechos humanos, con periodismo con enfoque de desarrollo. Tenemos media horita, vamos a hacer una conversación, va a ser en inglés. Así que ya pido perdón, primero por el inglés, segundo por el constipado que tengo, que lo va a hacer más complicado todavía para que nos entendamos, pero vamos a aprovechar el tiempo y vamos a hablar de un proyecto que nos trae Mark, que es el Guardian Development Project, el proyecto de información social con enfoque de desarrollo, de cooperación al desarrollo y también del desarrollo en comunidades locales, de los problemas sociales relacionados con el cambio climático, relacionados con la crisis económica, relacionados con la desigualdad, que lleva a cabo el The Guardian. Lo hace además de una manera muy especial porque está patrocinado, subvencionado, financiado por la fundación de Bill Gates y Melinda Gates, que también es un tema como muy candente. ¿Cómo demonios vamos a financiar los periodistas que nos dedicamos a determinado tipo de información, la información que nos apasiona, la información por la que nos dedicamos a esto, la información que además notamos que cada vez más reclama la gente, pero que ya que no forma parte del circuito de influencia habitual de los grandes medios de comunicación, interesa menos financiar o incluso un poquito peligroso financiar. ¿Cómo vamos a conseguir que eso salga adelante? Mark nos va a contar su experiencia, que le vamos a preguntar por los pros y los contras de esta manera de financiación y que nos cuente algunas de las cosas que ha aprendido en algunos de esos países donde ya ha hecho la presentación Arturo, él ha trabajado. Aunque también ha trabajado en Washington, ha trabajado en Nueva York, de manera que tiene una visión de los dos lados del sistema. Ha trabajado con mujeres granjeras en algunas comunidades locales del África subsahariana, y también ha visitado los despachos de negocio más importantes de Manhattan. Eso le da una perspectiva amplia de por dónde se mueve el mundo del desarrollo. Así que no le quito más tiempo, empezamos aquí con la charla. Mark, thank you for being with us. The first question is, what is exactly the Garden Development Project? How many people work there? Why it is so important? I mean, why are we talking today about it and not about any other project on social journalism?
Okay. The Guardian has always had strong foreign affairs coverage, and back in the 1970s it had something called the Third World Page. You wouldn't use that phrase now, but it was an early example of its interest in development matters in the developing world. And the roots of the Global Development Site spring back to 2007, when The Guardian wanted to try and cover development in a micro way, partly as a counter to what was seen as aid fatigue. And the project that it decided to do was to team up with an NGO to get contributions from readers. It launched a Christmas appeal. Every Christmas, British newspapers launch a Christmas appeal to raise money for a worthy cause. And in this particular case, the project was a community in Katine in northern Uganda. And the idea was to raise money and work with an NGO and provide media coverage of development, of how development affects a particular community, the ups and downs, the problems, challenges, and so on. And that project lasted for about 3 years. And after that, the people who were involved thought, how can we continue this? And from that came the idea for a global development site, which would cover development on a larger scale, on a global scale. And at the same time, the Gates Foundation was interested in finding a media partner to cover development, and in particular, the Millennium Development Goals, which were launched in 2000 with 8 specific goals on reducing poverty. MDG 1, for example, is to eradicate extreme poverty. And so there was a coincidence of interests between The Guardian and the Gates Foundation. And the initial thought for the Global Development Site was that it would be more of a curating aggregate site. It would bring in reports from our correspondents in economics, covering economics, foreign affairs, and also contributing articles from people outside. But it soon realized that people, the other reporters in The Guardian, were very busy with their own work and couldn't always devote time to write about development matters. And so it decided to have its own dedicated reporter. So I am the dedicated reporter, although my colleagues also write when they have the chance to. We're a small team, so I'm the dedicated correspondent. We have a couple of editors. We have a community coordinator because we think it's important to have a presence on social networks, so that person makes sure that we have a presence on Facebook and Twitter, retweets our articles, makes sure that goes out to the through social media. And the work itself, so apart from our own content, it's a partnership as well. We have articles from experts, development experts. We have people from the UN, the head of UNICEF, for example, he will offer articles to us. People from the Conservative government. And so it's a very rich array of content. Lots of people from outside contributing their expert views. So it makes for a rich combination of analysis, comment, and news. My job is to cover the numerous reports that come out from the development area. And what's really important is to go out and see what is happening in places like South Sudan, Kenya, Bangladesh, because despite the importance of Twitter, Facebook, social media, there is really no substitute for going out there and talking to the poor women farmers in Kenya to see what they're doing with drip irrigation, what they're doing with the latest irrigation techniques in order to improve their lives. And thanks to the Gates Foundation, we have the luxury of going out there to see for ourselves what is going on the ground.
We'll get back right away about Gates Foundation, but how many people visit this site per month? Do you have any numbers in mind?
Yeah, we have about 400,000 unique users per calendar month. And if you look at the graph, it's a slowly upward line with dips and peaks and troughs, but it's gradually going upwards. So those are the numbers. Just by way of comparison, our nearest equivalent, I suppose, is the environment site. They have about 3 times the amount of users, unique users. So we are quite a niche site, but we obviously try to treat the subject in as approachable, accessible way as possible to readers. And traffic can be affected by really popular articles. For example, my colleague John Vidal from Environment wrote a piece from the Stockholm water conference when there was a report from scientists saying perhaps we all have to turn vegetarian because of climate change, lack of water to grow crops. And that article was massively popular and had a huge impact on that month's traffic. So it can depend on particular articles as to how our traffic does per month.
As we said, global development in the garden has the support of Melissa and Bill Gates Foundation. What's the role they play in all this? Do they interfere in the editorial independency of the Guardian in this field? Tell us about that.
Okay, when you go to the global development site, you will see on the top right-hand corner, supported by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So it's very clear that we have support from the foundation. We have complete editorial independence. They leave us alone, basically, to get on with covering development as we see fit. They ask quarterly reports from us to see how we're doing, how many people are reading us, what kind of articles are popular. So there's no editorial interference whatsoever. And as to questions of conflict of interest, it's clear that the Gates Foundation has a certain way of looking at development with its emphasis on technology, technocratic approach to development, which is understandable given Bill Gates's background in computers and his background with Microsoft. It's also an American way of looking at development, of thinking that technology can provide solutions. And the site takes note of that. I mean, for instance, I remember there was a parliamentary committee hearing where a Gates Foundation executive was asked about its emphasis on vaccines. It's very strong on vaccines, classic technological solution to a development problem. And one of the members of parliament said, why vaccines, why not sanitation? And the executive said, well, we have to do both. And recently it had a competition for a toilet, a high-tech toilet that converts a waste to energy. And I wrote a story about it.
Whoa.
But
sorry about that.
But pointing out that although it had this prize for this new toilet that could help improve sanitation in the developing world, it's the amount of money that the Gates Foundation devotes to sanitation is very small compared to vaccines. So we kind of bring out the emphasis of the Gates Foundation where its priorities lie in development. And also on agriculture, it's a big player in agriculture now. And my colleague interviewed the head of its agricultural projects and raising these issues of the Foundation's priorities.
we were very lucky here. If the glass broke, it would be chaos here. Okay, let's forget about that. Is this the only way to finance some social journalism? I mean, some of us have tried to get funds for social journalism. Some of us have failed. Some of us keep trying. Is philanthropy the only way you see all around the world? You travel a lot. For this kind of social journalism, independent editorial independency?
Well, we're about to find out ourselves, because the funding from the Gates Foundation lasts until 2014, and maybe it will renew the funding for another 3 years, or maybe we'll have to find other sources. And The Guardian is exploring ways of doing this. One model is to develop these professional networks. So, for example, education, social services, they have their own networks. And the way that works is that it's basically sponsorship from various people who have interests in those areas. So sustainable business, we have a sustainable business network. So you might get some companies that come forward with sponsorship money, and then those networks will provide editorial content. And it's kind of separate from The Guardian, but it's a way of raising money to fund the work of The Guardian itself. But we'll see. I mean, as far as global development is concerned, and philanthropies, there are worse sources of funding than philanthropies for our work.
I'll put it another way. It would be possible, this project, without the foundation?
Initially, no, probably not. So, yeah. Without the Gates Foundation, the global development probably wouldn't exist. Yeah.
Let's talk about the content, the stories you cover.
Yeah.
Could you name 4, 5 big, huge problems you're covering that you think there should be more in the political agenda? The 5 top more important problems.
Well, we cover already quite a lot: food security and agriculture. Given the population increase that we're going to see by 2050, we have to feed 9 billion people. So there is the issue of how we're going to do that, and that's connected with climate change. With changing climate, what kind of crops are you going to grow? Are you going to still be able to grow wheat, maize, and rice when the experts say that climate is going to reduce the yield in those crops? We may have to grow other hardier crops like barley, millet, cassava. That's a big issue. The Millennium Development Goals are coming to the end by 2015, so there's a big debate on what follows after 2015, and one of the things that's emerging quite clearly is the issue of inequality, because there is the realization that economic growth alone does not guarantee well-being or stability, as we saw from the Arab Spring. So food, climate change, inequality. And one thing that keeps recurring is gender. I mean, the question of women has been around for ages. At least 20 years, the World Bank has been talking about the issue of gender inequality and how if women are empowered, it would make such a huge difference. And you see this when you go out to countries like Kenya and South Sudan, the people who are working in the fields are women. The people who are gathering, who have to wait hours by the water pumps, are women and children, you know, collecting heavy canisters of water and then carrying them for hours back to the village. The people who bring the children to the health centers for vaccination are women. And that again is something that's going a big issue for the post-2015. So those are some of the issues. And of course, aid, with the crisis in the developed world, economic crisis, all aid budgets are under pressure. So that's a big subject. The question is, you know, why should the UK, Spain, Greece, France spend money on aid when there's so much trouble at home? The question is, you know, if you cut aid, are you sure that money is going to go for social needs back home? I'm not sure that will happen. And also, people in the UK think that a lot of money goes on aid, but in fact, it's a very, very small proportion of taxpayer money goes on aid, even if the UK hits the 0.7%. And of course, the poverty that you have in Europe doesn't compare to the extreme levels of poverty that you see in countries like Bangladesh, Kenya, and South Sudan. So I think, you know, there's a question of moral duty to help these countries, these people. But also, there's a danger that people become too fixated on 0.7% target of gross national income going towards aid. You also have to look at the policies that countries in the West have that can help or hinder the developing world. For example, agricultural subsidies in the US. I mean, as somebody told me, the US Farm Bill probably has more impact on smallholder African farmers than anything else. So there has to be attention to policies within the West that may be damaging to the developing world.
Let me ask you just final question before we open the floor. Yeah. Is anyhow connected the situation you've seen in the world with the local crisis in Spain or in Greece, or even more? How do we expect people to think about all of this you're talking about if, yes, we have their hands on this drama, social drama, daily life here in Spain? How it is connected? Is it connected? How do we prepare our minds to connect that?
It's connected in that people essentially are after the same things: decent job, decent quality of life, a level of well-being. And for example, you have a huge level of youth unemployment in Spain now. The president of Liberia, who was in London to talk about what follows in 2015, she talks about the problem of the youth bulge in her country, the problem of youth unemployment, and how unless you give them jobs, there is the potential for huge social upheaval, social tension. You can see this practically every day in the streets of Madrid. You see this in Greece. So there are certain concerns which are universal, which apply as much in the developing world as in the developed world. And one of the problems that we saw in Tunisia, where the Arab Spring started, was that Tunisia had great economic growth. You know, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, they said Tunisia is a great model. We have these very strong growth targets, growth figures, but underneath the headline numbers, there was a huge bulge, a youth bulge, huge youth unemployment, and that was one of the big contributing factors to the Arab Spring, this kind of build-up of social tension that was not taken care of.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mark. We shall now take your questions. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. Si queréis hacerla en español, podemos intentar traducirla, pero no fiéis mucho de mí, que ya veis que estoy torpón. ¿Alguna pregunta? Any questions? Si no, I don't know if through Twitter we have any more questions through the hashtag we proposed. Anyway, we can take advantage of this situation, and I can go further and keep asking. Okay. Climate change. Was climate change a trend? Was a hype? Was a craze? Was just a way of making money or political propaganda? Is that the real inconvenient truth?
All the climate scientists, I'm not an environment expert, but from everything that I read from my colleagues on The Guardian and elsewhere, there is a consensus among climate scientists that the climate change is happening. And in fact, the superstorm that hit the northeast coast of the United States has brought climate change into the political agenda. In fact, one of the reasons why Michael Bloomberg, the Republican mayor of New York, came out in support of Obama was because of climate change. He thinks Romney is wrong on climate change, and Obama is in the right place. So it's no, it can't be dismissed as just propaganda. And you see the evidence with the melting of the Arctic ice cap. Mm-hmm. It's happening, and you see it in the increasing frequency of natural disasters in the Sahel, in Niger, where I went this year. The drought has become the intervals between drought is growing shorter and shorter. And one of the big issues in development now is how to prepare farmers, communities for these shocks from nature. And one of the big themes of development now is how to build up resilience. There's this term, disaster risk reduction. How to put in place policies that will prevent the recurrence of these big emergencies where you wait until the emergency hit and then you provide emergency aid, which is very expensive. And prevention is always going to be cheaper than the cure. And this is one of the big things that is the development communities is trying to grapple with.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you everybody for attending this little chat. Gracias a todos y seguimos con el programa. Muchas gracias.